is the Revisionary Podcast with your host, Juan Carlos. The Revisionary Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Revisionary Podcast. And as always, I'm your host, Juan Carlos. So, just in case this is your first time listening to the podcast, if it is, welcome. Thank you for listening. The way the Revisionary Podcast works is we bring on people, guests who usually are comedians, but not always. And we give them an opportunity to tell us a story in which they wish things had gone a little bit differently. Afterwards, we give them an opportunity to retell the same exact story, except this time, they get to change any facts or details about the story that they'd like. And then we go ahead and discuss the impact of the changes that they've made. So now that we've cleared that up, let's go ahead and talk about the ongoing contest that we have. If you haven't heard already, we have a contest going on. Please make sure that you're following us on social media so that you can get all the details. There's a cash prize to enter for an opportunity to win the cash prize is that you go ahead and rate us on Apple Music. Just go ahead and give us 5 stars and review us and let the world know why you actually like this podcast and let them know that you enjoy listening. And then after you do that, just send us a screenshot to show us that you actually did leave a rating. And we'll enter your name and then we'll announce when we're doing the drawing and the winner gets a cash prize. Pretty easy. The other thing that we want to bring up is we have a very exciting guest today. We actually have another comedian. I know you guys love the comedians. I mean, what can I say? I know a lot of comedians, so that's who we bring on all the time. And this comedian in particular is a person I'm quite fond of. His online persona, he is just such a unique character. Like, just to give you a little background, first and foremost, let me introduce him. We have the wonderful Marcus Cardona joining us this week. And Marcus is a wonderful human being. Like, he really just is. The best way to describe Marcus is, first and foremost, let me start out by telling you that he is originally from Maine, but now he lives in Brooklyn and has been living in Brooklyn for a little bit. But he is a Maine guy through and through. He often likes to joke that his family is the only Filipino family in Maine and what that is like. And more than anything, he likes to call himself a neurotic entertainer. I personally teased him and told him that he really is the protector of audience against hacks and hacky comedian. For those of you guys who don't know, basically a hack comedian or hacky is like someone who makes the kinds of jokes that kind of have already been done. So basically any comedian that like jokes about things that have been done over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, that's considered hack comedy. Like you guys have all heard the classic is, well, isn't airline food so bad kind of situation? Yeah, so Marcus makes it a sport to call out these types of comedians often, and he's constantly sending shade at them. So that's one of the things I really enjoy because he's a very authentic human being. I remember one of the first things I saw about Marcus talking about was how his dream was to get a sponsorship from Mountain Dew. So I hope he gets that Mountain Dew sponsorship. So if you're listening, Marcus is available. Or maybe he's not available. I don't know. I can't even speak to that anymore. I think if you read his bio, one of the things that he likes to say about himself is that he's a postmodern comedian. I don't know exactly what that means, but I mean, it sounds way fancier. It sounds like somebody who has an art degree, which I do not. I feel like that's the type of saying that should be followed by the term avant-garde, which I don't fully understand what that means either. But here we are, and this is what we're doing, all right? So that's how I'm going to introduce Marcus. Just sit back because, like I said, he's such a wonderful personality. And I always enjoy my conversations with Marcus because, again, as I mentioned earlier, he is extremely authentic as a person. And it's one of the things that I really appreciate about him. So without further ado, let's see if we can get Marcus on the line. Hey, Marcus, how are you?
Hey, Juan. I'm doing pretty good, man. In New York right now, just on some downtime from working in Philly.
Yeah? What have you been up to?
I've been trying to keep sane during the pandemic.
Impossible.
Yeah. I still have work, but it's not like anything that would warrant me to stay in New York at the moment. I'm in Maine. I'm producing a bunch of shows, just writing, and basically I'm enjoying retirement with my parents. Like, during the regular like time.
So does this mean that you've skipped to the stage where you're just like drinking margaritas at 10 in the morning? Is that the stage of retirement you're at?
Oh no, my parents are like old school retirement. Like it's like all like the house projects that they haven't done.
Right.
They're like doing it all right now. So I'm just like the third hand. I'm like the helping hand that was just like there the whole time because like my dad has projects, my mom has projects, and they're like, well, our son's here, so yeah.
Wait, are you like handy? Like, are you good with like woodwork and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's mostly my parents are hoarders, so it's mostly just like sorting and putting stuff in boxes. To be honest.
That's pretty dope. So can I ask you a question? You're from Maine originally.
Yep.
How did your family end up in Maine?
Oh, man. Okay, cool. So this is like history. My grandpa fought in World War II for the U.S. from the Philippines. He got amnesty there. So that's how my dad's side came here. And then my mom, she was a girl in the Philippines who's like, I don't want to stay in the Philippines. I want to go to the U.S. And then she went with like 3 of her best friends. And then she met my dad in Maine, ironically. But my grandpa ended up in Maine because of they sent him like when they gave him like U.S. citizenship, they said Portland, but they didn't know about the Portland like Maine base, so they thought Oregon the whole time.
Right.
And yeah, that's pretty much how that happened. And yeah, 2 Filipinos met in Maine, and then they're just that was enough because I'm like that state is white, so they're just like yeah, we gotta stick together, and then that's how I ended up there.
So your grandfather had a choice though. It wasn't like they're like you must stay in Maine.
Yeah. My grandpa was just like he was just like, oh, I'm gonna take any kind of U.S. citizenship, and he's like, yeah, this place is cold, but whatever.
That's pretty dope. And what was it like growing up in Maine?
White. Like it's very it's super interesting because I never want to say that I'm basically like a white kid, but like I'm good at talking to white kids.
You feel comfortable.
No, I feel so comfortable. It wasn't until like I moved to Brooklyn and then I'm like, oh cool. I was the only diversity growing up. So white kids would ask me like, oh, what do you think about like this like black stereotype? What do you think about this Latino stereotype? I'm like, I'm Asian, but I'm like, well, you're not that Asian. And I'm just like, I don't know what I'm supposed to say. But then like once I moved to New York, I'm like, oh, look at this diversity. I get to just be myself. And I'm just like, I'm like awkward enough, but I transitioned really well. I'm like, if you see me in Maine, I'm super Maine. But if you see me in Brooklyn, I'm hella Brooklyn. So
does this just mean that you wear flannels for both occasions? Because that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Like fashion is like, this is all new fashion. Before this, I was flannel. I look like a lesbian. I had like long hair.
So you guys can't see Marcus, but he's actually dressed like a skater kid right now.
Yeah, PlayStation, repping up for the 90s kids. Got to show my brand, and then I got a Portland Sea Dogs hat just to represent Maine. For the longest
time, I thought they played in Portland, Oregon. I didn't know they were up in Maine.
Yeah. It's a New England team, so it makes sense eventually. It makes sense eventually. Just like what's the New York's like amateur league team or the Mets?
The Brooklyn Cyclones and the Staten Island Yankees.
Yeah, the Cyclones. Like named after the roller coaster. That's solid.
Love it. I love it. Actually, they won the championship. I believe it was last year.
What, the Cyclones?
Yeah, fun fact.
Oh man, I just go to Cyclones games because they're cheap and you can get drunk on the boardwalk.
I mean, isn't that why everyone goes to minor league games?
Yeah, pretty much. Same thing with Portland. I'm just like, all right, cool.
That's pretty dope. Have you been working on any projects or anything?
So before the pandemic, so this is pre-pandemic, I was like already like planning on pitching like some shows that would be like for television. I was planning on recording my album in November. Obviously that got nicked, and then it might still happen. And then I was setting up like a tour, but through breweries. So I was setting up a brewery tour before all this. So that pretty much all got wiped. And then now I've been able to produce outdoor shows in Maine safely, which is cool. I've had 2 shows recently, and then upcoming is going to be 2 more shows. And then I'm not sure, depending on November, December, with the venue, if we're going to keep doing that or I'm going to transition indoors or do a brewery thing or go on tour. I have no idea.
Wow, that's pretty dope. Especially the whole main shows, because I was watching you when you were putting them on outside, and I was sitting there like watching you from the inside. It's like that scene like when the rain's on the window, and you're just like, and you're sadly staring like, I miss doing comedy.
You're like, this is fun, and then you're just like staring at it. Dude, it's one of those things because like I started comedy in the New England scene. But Massachusetts, Boston, New Hampshire, and like all the ones in the middle never really gave me any opportunity. So then now I'm doing shows because I went from like Maine to New York, and the comedy club in Maine was just like, yo, you get free range to produce the shows however you want. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to book the friends I like. I'm going to book the New England comics I know. But then it's just like every now and then I'm just like, if Maine was just like 2 hours closer, I'm like, I could get people. But it's a 5-hour drive. So I've gotten who I've gotten, and then I've had fun shows, so.
Why don't we go ahead and get into this before we get too sidetracked? Because you and I could talk for hours.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead, Marcus. The stage is yours. Why don't you go ahead and tell us your story?
All right, kids, boys and girls, theys, thems, any non-binaries listening to it. So this is the story of Marcus in New York, year one. So the year was 2013. I recently was like decided I'm going to skip Boston. I went from Maine straight to New York. I'd done mics and shows in Boston, but I was like, okay, if I'm going to go for comedy, I'm just going to go for the biggest place on the East Coast. So went for New York. 2013, I was bouncing back and forth. It was probably like my junior year of college, and I was bouncing back and forth through New York. But when I first got to New York, it was like, just a small like town, bright-eyed kid. Like have his dreams. Like you could like con me out of so much money. But the first job I had in New York, this is all like stories about like how ambitious I was and how I messed up in so many different ways. Cause I'm like that first year in New York, like you like get super caught up in tourism. You're just like, oh, I want to live the lifestyle. I want to go to a fancy bar. I want to go party in Times Square for some reason.
What?
Yeah, I was so I was so naive, and like when you don't know what to do, you just do all this stuff. And then also this is only 2013, but in my mind, I'm like, this is how the professionals do it. So I made a bunch of business. I came to New York with like 600 Vistaprint business cards.
No, you didn't.
Why? I'm still trying to get rid of them. I've gone through 3 business cards, but the first like batch, I'm gonna get 600 business cards. I'm gonna give them out because I was going for everything, acting and whatnot. They didn't have my name on, or they had my name on it. They had my phone number. They had my headshot on it, but they didn't say what I did. So I littered them throughout hotels and everything like that, and like agencies that were like gonna maybe sign me for film and all this dumb stuff that I'm like, this is how you do it. This is how you become ambitious, and all this dumb, like, you don't know how the industry works. So this is like me getting like introduced to like the industry. So I littered a bunch of like business cards and whatnot. They're going nowhere. I got one call from a lady at a hotel, which I don't know why I left business cards at a hotel. I'm like, in my mind, it's like, oh, maybe a celebrity will see my business card and be like, yo, this is the talent I've been looking for. And a lady called me and she thought I was a escort, like a male.
That's what I would have thought.
It was bad, but that's just like one small example. But the year's super bad. So the first job I ever got in New York, the restaurant's not open anymore. It is a restaurant called Pure Food and Wine. I'm going to school for human nutrition and dietetics. I've worked in restaurants my whole life. The restaurant is a raw vegan restaurant. It's like super high profile, Pure Food and Wine. It's right there in Gramercy, like right off Union Square. And it's raw vegan. So one, I can cook. I know about the nutritional value of food, but because it's raw vegan, it's vegetables. None of them are cooked, but people are paying like $400 for like $300 for like these meals and stuff like that, tasting menus. Celebrities have come into the restaurant when I was there. Bill Clinton came in, Alison Brie from Community, and Glow. At one point, I found out that these 3 celebrities were friends. Woody Harrelson, David Blaine, and Owen Wilson, because they smoked weed in our backyard in the restaurant.
Snitching.
And weed's legal. Come on,
Not in New York.
Okay, never mind. You know what? If you're David Blaine, it's just like, yeah, what weed? Like, that's it. Magic, it disappears. That's how I feel about the whole situation.
Right.
But so I work at this restaurant. It's good for a couple months, but then like we don't get paid for a long time, like 2-3 weeks. I have to go back to Maine, but then all my coworkers are still there. We get conned out of this money, and it becomes like my first job in New York. We get conned out of this money. There's like people at the restaurant are like picketing and all this stuff. And they're like, hey, we, deserve to be paid. We haven't been paid for 2 months.
Wait. Management just decided not to pay you? Is that what it is?
No, the management was trying to like go around us and be like, hey, we're trying to figure out with the paychecks. They haven't come in yet. We'll get back to you as soon as possible.
Got it.
You can look this up, Pure Food and Wine. The woman, she goes missing, like the owner goes missing. And what later happens is she gets busted as like the vegan Bernie Madoff. She gets busted with her husband who was in prison, who was like a big mafia dude. And they get busted because they use a credit card to order Domino's pizza, which I'm just like, ooh, raw vegan lady. Cause like she sold books. Like she was one of those crazy celebrity chefs. So that's just my job in New York. So that's like just one small example of like that. And like, again, like I'm super naive. Like the 2 months the time I wasn't getting paid, I was just like, whatever. I'm not fully in New York. I just lost a little bit of money. And during that time, like I was still like a hustler. Like, again, I came out with business cards and stuff like that. So the story, I guess, is going to so that's just a small like snippet of the big thing. But when I came to New York, I came with a lot of like ideas. I emailed people I didn't know. Like I was messaging like people who produce shows, like what I could do so I could pitch some ideas. So I came to New York with like this idea, like, I don't know what everyone else is doing in comedy. People are like, oh, you should hang out in clubs. And I want to go on the writer side. So I managed to get a ghostwriting job with an NDA. I can't mention the show on camera because I did not work for them, but I took the money. So
no worries.
Yeah. So I'm just explaining it. It's on its 10th season on Netflix. You guys can guess it. But I was there for season 7, and what ended up happening is as a creative, don't sign a ghostwriting deal. It's like, it's one of those things where like they just take advantage of when you're super young and new to the industry, because they throw a lot of money at you up front, but it's kind of like you want your name to be attached to whatever work you ever have. So first off, my job, big scandal. Second off, I signed this ghostwriting gig.
Right.
That is just I regret it so much because I did such a good job, and like a lot of the script that I wrote made it into the series, but my name is not attached to it because I was underneath the team.
That's awful.
Yeah. Oh no, this is like, it just keeps going on like the con, because I'm like in New York, I'm just like, New York really made me like analyze how to not be hustled. Because I'm like that, like everything just sounded good. I'm like, okay, cool. I got this. But so after I get the ghostwriting job, I already have like a script. Like I came to New York ambitious. It broke me down, but I came with a script for a TV show about Portland, Maine. And it was like before they revamped the Muppets. So the whole thing that I had was Portland, Maine's comedy scene was developing, because Portland, Maine did not have a comedy scene from 2012, or they didn't have an official comedy club from 2012 to 2020. So this is 2013. And I had like a script written about trying to do comedy in Portland, Maine, where I'm a main character.
Is this how Portlandia came into be, or are you not allowed?
No. This is completely irrelevant. Portlandia is the other Portland.
I know, but they could have.
Yeah, they could have just jacked my idea for sure. But it was basically about me trying to do comedy in Portland, Maine, and all the primary characters were regular people, but all the secondary characters were puppets. And basically, like, this is my favorite thing because, I'm a nobody who's like pitching this idea. I think it's good. I have like a whole season written out. And what ends up happening is the agency's like, oh, I don't really see this idea coming off, I'm like, it's not really a popular thing. And then literally like the year after, the Muppets movies and everything kind of got revamped. And they're like, oh, look at all these adult puppet shows with like regular casts. I'm just like, I got, it's like a lot of retrospective anger. But
of course, I don't blame you.
But the final thing that happens is like, you know, again, like once you come to New York, you get to hear about like, how do you make it in comedy and like, you know, hanging out at clubs, getting known, getting past at clubs, all these things, getting a TV credit. And it was one of those things where at that point, so 2013, I was doing comedy for 3-4 years. So I'm like, I know I'm new, but it was just like one of those ones where I'm like, I think I'm good enough to get what I want to do. All I need is like I need a representative to be like, this is my client. He's trying to like do X, Y, Z.
Right.
So I go into this talent agency and talent agencies and like me, like be like, no matter what, when it comes down to entertainment, the most underrepresented groups that I think in like Western media or TV media are Asians or Latino women. For some reason, like those are the two big groups. Like this is like right, and it's 2013. So I think right at that time they just came out with Insecure. Like they had like all these shows that are pushing diversity, and it just like it's like super hard for like, you know, me to like pitch them. And I'm like going in, I'm like, hey, I've been doing comedy since this time. I'm a Filipino comic from New England. I'm from Maine specifically. And it's so funny because I'm like, I won't say the agency's name out either, just in case they listen to this. And they're like, oh, you guys slandered us. We're going to take you back in now. But what ends up happening is like, I give them a solid pitch. Like I show them, these are the projects that I'm working on. This is the thing that I've gotten to this person, this person, this person. And I just want to show that I'm ready. I think I can get a representative. I gave them all my business card. I had like a full on like pitch. I should have had like, I felt like a PowerPoint might have helped, but I was super confident. And I also showed up in like an oversized blazer because again, I had no fashion. So I'm wearing like Goodwill hand-me-downs. I'm trying to look professional. And I'm just like in this boardroom and I'm pitching them. And it's super funny because I'm pitching them like, you know, I've told them jokes. I've shown them like how prepared I am. And I'm just looking for representation. So they leave, they come, and I'm like sitting in this like area in like this office. They're discussing stuff and it's like 5 of them. So they leave, one person comes in, one person comes out, one person comes in, one person comes out. I'm there for like maybe like 3 hours or so. Woman comes out and she's like the nicest like representative. And this is like what bothers me the most because she comes out to me and she's like, oh, we actually think you're super talented. But we're just like letting you know we're based on like, you know, demographics. And we just don't think that we don't think Asians or your area is like an easy market. And this is 2013. So this is when like Hollywood and like all these like different media places are like, we're going to be pushing to expand our diversity thing. And it like, oh my God, like that triggered me so much. Cause it's like I already have like started like moving here. I've already like decided like, you know, I'm going for New York. And it's just like, oh no, we know you're doing the work, but just because of your existence and where you're from, what you look like, it's not gonna like take off. And then I'm not gonna slander anyone either, but it's crazier because even in comedy, like the 2 comedians who came out with like the Netflix special, or they had like the lineup specials right after, were like J.R. De Guzman. So he's a Filipino comic, so not Joe Coy. And then Emma Willman, who she's from Maine, but she never did like Southern Maine where I did shows. So she went straight from Maine to New York. And it's like, it's one of those things that bothers me because I'm like, well, these are 2 comics who I fit, like they're 2 separate comics, but I fit both those. And it's just like, you're trying to push diversity, but you're not. And like that one gets me triggered. So like at this point, I'm like just super naive. Like I walk out, I just grab my things. I'm super embarrassed. I'm like, all right, whatever. And yeah, pretty much like I feel like that year 1 stuff from me moving to New York and pursuing comedy has like just like been like the fuel just to prove everyone wrong since then. Cause like now I'm producing more stuff than like, and like high quality stuff too. Like that's it. It's not like a small shitty bar show. It's like I have an album. I have like all the products that are ready to go, but it's just like, how do you network yourself? So that way you get like the representation, you get like, the opportunity, because again, entertainment now is like what endorsements you can get, like if you can get Netflix to back you up, you can get a comedy club to back you up, you can get other professionals to back you up.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's pretty much my year one story in New York that beat me down and then allowed me to rise like a phoenix.
The Revisionary Podcast.
I want to say thank you to all of you who listen to me week in and week out. Quite honestly, I'm extremely humbled by the amount of support that I'm reaching from all of you guys. And honestly, just like you guys, I'm a huge fan of this podcast. But the worst thing about it is sometimes I'm trying to like listen on my cell phone and my data starts to cut in and out. So it makes it hard to listen to what's going on and really get into the story and feel like I'm involved. The worst part is when you look at it and your data is the only thing that's cutting out, but your cell phone service is perfectly fine, which is why I'm glad that I was able to find the Bullhorn app, because every podcast that's on the Bullhorn app comes with a 10-digit phone number. So you can actually call in and listen to the Revisionary Podcast as if you were on a phone call instead of having to use your data. Go ahead and make sure that you download the Bullhorn app out of your provider's app store. Or if you want, you can just go to their website, bullhorn.fm, and listen there.
The Revisionary Podcast.
If you could retell the story, what would you have done differently?
I think it's literally just being more confident in myself, because like, again, all like the anger that I had was just like retrospective, but it's like people with experience telling you that creatively what you're doing is wrong, that you can't appeal to a certain audience. And then just like, just not being like when it comes down to like working in the entertainment industry and living in New York too, it's really like a money numbers game, but you just need to approach it from like a smart way. You got to be confident in your product. Like Shark Tank should have came out in 2012 so I could watch it and be like, nope, this is how I know it's going to be successful, because I was so naive. I didn't think about money. I was like, I'm going to chase the dream. And it was just like, it just like beat me down so hard.
Well, let me ask you a few questions here. For starters, do you feel that any of these experiences helped shape your voice and who you would eventually become in New York?
Oh yeah, no, for sure. Like it's one of those things, because I'm like, it is like entertain. Like you know it, I know it. Audiences don't necessarily know it as much, but comedy is like a big rat race, and it's one of those things where even if I don't get your humor, but you're still getting on stage, I can recognize that you have the ability to grow, and like I might be wrong. So in terms of like the positions that I've taken, becoming assistant manager at Brooklyn House of Comedy, deciding to still host open mics for like, new comics, deciding to like, produce my own shows, produce my own tours independently. There's no agency. There's no one really backing me up on that. Like all that stuff was like really it. 'Cause I'm just like, oh, if no one's going to support me or back me up, I'm just going to produce it myself. And then I'm going to have the audience give me value rather than like this bigger company to tell everyone, be like, oh no, he's funny. Trust us. We only know you can laugh at, Netflix approved comedians. I'm like, whatever.
Well, let me ask you another thing. If you could redo your business cards today, but could only pick one title, like one thing, Marcus Cardona is...
Oh, yeah, I do comedian. I just straight up comedian. Yeah.
Okay.
No. Actually, I'd be obnoxious. I'd be comedy genius. Just I should have been so much. I should have been like comedy. I'd either do comedy genius or I do either brand expert, because they're like keywords that work in corporate America. And I'm like, if you say that you're a brand specialist, then it's just like that encompasses everything. I was like, ooh. What brands? I'm like, every brand. I'm a specialist. like it's one of those, like a lot of New York is overconfidence. If you say that you specialize in something, you can probably get like $300 for it. Again, like raw vegan restaurant. People were overpaying it, but I'm like, it's the confidence. Like, I'm not trying to con anyone. I just want to make that clear.
I don't know. I wasn't going to correct you.
But all I learned from working at the vegan place is like, yeah, I'm like, if you sell your product, or in the comedy world, if you sell yourself as a comedian, you really gotta just sell it. You can't let anyone else validate you. and then you'll build your audience, you'll build your following that way.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because I do think that something that you said is crucial is that there is an audience for most comics.
Yeah.
I say most because, you know, some people, like, perfect example, right? It's the shock comedy. It's not my personal favorite brand of comedy, but those comics, you know, there are a lot of people who go see them who want to hear the shock humor and want to hear offensive things being said on stage.
But it's also, here's the thing that I'd say. They want to hear offensive things to be said by celebrities, not a new comic. Because I'm like, because when I started comedy, I was like the shock comic too. But no one in Maine wanted to hear from like this like kid who grew up like 2 towns over just being offensive. I was like, oh, cool. Like Chappelle gets to tell jokes that Chappelle can tell because he's Chappelle. Same thing with Bill Burr. Because I'm like, every time a comic comes up like Bill Burr, like to the stage, I'm just like, oh man, I'm like, it's probably funny, but you're not Bill Burr, so you can't say that.
I mean, don't you roll up to the stage and be like, yeah, I'm Marcus Cardona.
Yeah, but I built the brand. You heard 2013. Someone thought I was an escort. I was told so many times that, hey, this idea is not going to work. This is a weird idea. You're not marketable. And then all of a sudden it was just like, all right, here, give me a couple of years. And then boom. But it's still like, even now I don't have any representation, but it's still so dumb because I pretty much exist in New York under this reputation now through the scene.
So let's say your show had gotten picked up when you went and pitched it, right?
Yeah.
How would your life have been different? Walk me through that. What would have happened?
Oh man. So I was pitching to a couple different networks. They all shut down. Well, basically one big place shut me down, and they were like my referral to the other like few. If that happened, I definitely would be in writers' rooms way more. Because I would like, you know, even though it's my first show that I pitched and like, you know, it went through, I would have given up like, you know, creative control. So it would have like my idea would have showed itself a little bit, and then whoever else came in. Cause like at the time I just moved to New York, I was super poor. So I would have like signed a contract and then been like, hey, we have the rights to your show. You get this money, but we're going to like change like 70% of your story. But if my show got carried through, I would have at least been in the network. I would have had the non-ghostwriting job. I would have been like creative, like, you know, I would have been on the creative team, even at like a base level, and like have like a bigger director like be over me. Cause ideally I feel like a lot of comedians, they either want to be like the podcast comedian where they're just doing podcasts during the day and doing comedy at night. But I always wanted to be a writer comedian or an actor comedian, but I'm just better at writing. So I think I'd be doing that. Cause like right now I'm doing advertising. I'm just like driving. It's like actual labor, but it's essential. People are sleeping on it. I'm like, everyone's still trying to advertise to you. So I think that would be it. But obviously, I wouldn't produce as much as I do now. Like that's like the thing. Like even though that was like a hard hard rejection, and then you know I got to see like ideas that I came up with, but didn't get like because I didn't have anyone representing me that got produced. It's like I know that they were good ideas, but they just didn't know who I was. So. Right. So at least now, like, you know, I can like look back and then be like, oh, are you a funny comedian? I'm like, I don't know. Talk to all my sold out shows. talk to this award show that I just randomly made up. Talk to anyone in New York City and then like the surrounding areas now. I'm just like, all right. So
why didn't you self-produce the shows on YouTube?
It's just a lot of work. I'm just like, as a comedian, I'm like, I'm going to be completely honest. I'm so lazy with self-production. Because I started off, besides shock comedy, I started off with sketch comedy too. And it's just like editing and all this stuff. And then once you're in New York, like no matter like when you're in New York hustling, I'm like, and doing shows and mics, I'm just like the time to do that. That's, I'm just like to do your day job, to do a mic, to do the show. And then you can still film sketches. Cause I'm like, every now and then I'm like the people who are filming sketches, they've either had someone editing it for them because they had the money to do that, or they have free time to film. Because I'm just like, I didn't have free time. Like when I moved to New York, I was just like, after all that happened, I'm like, boom, hustle. Like you just got to make money during the day, during your like non-comedy job, then everything at night, comedy, and then just keep cycling through over and over again.
Okay. So you mentioned how, you were super poor when you first got to New York.
Yeah.
And how much of that was the reason why you took the ghostwriting gig, or was there like an ulterior motive? Like in your head, did you think this is going to help me make it?
No, in my head, like cause like, again, there's like so many people who are like staff writers and then ghostwriting jobs. But I just moved here, so I didn't really have anyone to network with. So all I had for ghostwriting was basically random online chats and some of the other ghostwriters, which is basically like you're a freshman talking to other freshmen about how you're going to graduate college. Because everyone, like the staff that I worked with, it was a bunch of ghostwriters, but I only talked to like maybe a few people who were higher up who were like, oh, is this going to lead to anything? But during that time, I was just really grateful for the opportunity. But I was definitely so poor that when they threw the ghostwriting job at me, when they threw the money at me, I'm just like, I'm going to take this money, but I'm also going to do a good job. Because in my mind, as a ghostwriter, it's kind of like an unpaid internship. You think that you're going to do such a good job doing that position that they're going to hire you, but it just doesn't lead to that.
What's the weirdest thing you've ever done in New York for money?
Oh man.
I regret that immediately.
I'll be honest. I've been a tasker. What is it? Okay, so this one is not even task rabbit. This was a crush I had for a bartender who was super gothic. So what I'm like, it wasn't even a lot of money, but I'm just like, you're asking what the weirdest thing I've done for money is. So this bartender, I had a huge crush on her. She did like this show in Brooklyn where she was like BDSM. So I agreed to be her like demonstration. and yeah, I'm like, she paid me, but she also like whipped me, tied me up and all this shit like that on public display. Luckily I wasn't a big enough name in comedy that someone would like be like, oh, is that Marcus Tag? I was like, oh,
so is there footage of this that still exists?
Nope. Oh, actually, oh God. Okay, actually, no. I have a worse one because it's election season this year. And there is footage of this one. So the worst thing I've done for money. Okay, I was like, the fetish one was the weirdest one. But the worst thing I've done for money is this is the election. This is 2016. So this is the first election. My friend, she's an artist. She knows I'm comfortable with being naked. This is just a lot of revealing stuff about me.
Right.
But so she's an artist. We've done film together. She's like, hey, Marcus, this is a big opportunity for you to be seen. It's for the New Yorker. It's election night. I'm working at a restaurant in the Upper West Side. I text my boss. I'm like, hey, I have a project going on. It's election night. There's not really people here. Can I get cut early? And then they're like, yeah, sure. So I go to this place. The reason why she's asking if I'm comfortable being naked is this is 2016. So it's that time when there's like a bunch of like naked artists being painted on, and like they're just doing these murals. So it's election night. They need some male artists to pose naked while they paint the electoral map on people because they have too many girls. Yeah. So I'm there. I show up later than everyone else. I'm like the last guy. So like most of the US is filled, but there's a little bit of space like underneath California where Hawaii and Alaska would be, where I guess the compass would be. So I fill up that space. With me are like just a bunch of like smaller celebrities. Like there's a Dancing with the Stars guy there. There's some celebrity cook. I'm there as a comedian. I'm like laying there. And this is also Facebook Live started doing live streams. So they're live streaming this on election night. And then you can't just paint over a person and then just expect it well. So they had to paint you a canvas. So 1, I show up naked. 2, they had to paint me white as a black canvas. So it's election night, 2016. They're painting me white, head to toe, naked. And I'm like, this is like, and I'm an optimist. I'm like, Hillary's got this in the bag. And as time goes by, like, I'm this weird part of the map. I'm just seeing like everyone's starting to get painted red. And like, we're all clearly liberals because we're doing this. They're all crying. I'm crying. And like, they don't know what to do with me. I'm just like a blank part of this canvas. I'm like texting the internet decides to be like on Facebook. They're like, "What? Why is the cloud texting?" And I'm like, "I'm the cloud." and oh God. And so like as the election night goes, like they're deciding like, what do we put in this one area? They're like, oh, we should paint the winner on the cloud. So I'm watching everyone get painted red. I'm like sitting there like, oh my God, they're gonna paint Trump on my chest. I'm like, I'll send you this photo. But the election night's over. They count the elections and then they announce Donald Trump as the president. Where I'm crying, we're all crying for like this live mural. We're all like, "Oh, America's dead." And then there's so much paint on me, and it's so hard to just like rub it all off. So I just kind of cover like my shirt. I wipe my face off so I'm not all white, and like I just ride the subway back to Brooklyn. The morning after with Trump on my chest, I'm just like, it was, and like there's footage of this. So that is the worst thing I've ever done for money.
Hold on. So you said there's a photo. Can I post the photo on the Instagram for this podcast?
Yeah, it's fine. Anyway, guys, if you guys are listening, hustle hard. But if it comes to election, don't do this, because I'm like, no matter what, this is going to come back in some weird way whenever I blow up and be like, Marcus, do you support Trump? I'm like, no, I was poor.
It's funny. This blows the weirdest thing I've ever done out of the water. The weirdest thing I've ever done for money is take stock photos. Like, if you Google Getty photos, you might find me in a construction outfit, but that's it. That's as bad as it's gotten.
That's funny.
Yeah, you might show up to your next like training seminar at work and see just a random picture of me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, New York. Oh, God, yeah. I've been conned and I've been duped, but I'm still doing it. Like, that's it. Like, guys, the lesson you take away from Marcus is positivity, and then just keep doing it.
All right, so, we have to wind this down. But before I let you go, let me ask you a few questions. First, could you tell us a quick story of a happy memory from your childhood, or something that just puts a smile on your face, or anything that just makes you feel warm inside?
Yeah, I was like a nervous kid. I had asthma. I was like so nervous about everything. I constantly thought I was dying because my childhood was like dying. And like my favorite childhood memory is like the theme park in Maine, in Saco, Maine, Funtown, Splashtown, USA. We just finally got one of those like rides that drop up and down, like the one that goes like all the way to the top. Like if you ride it, you can see like the White Mountains in New Hampshire. That's how high it goes, and then it drops down. My favorite moment of that was like when it opened, I was like just at that height where it's like you must be this tall to ride. But I just went over it, and like it was so funny because I was like with my cousins and like family and stuff like that, and I was like allowed to go on the ride and they weren't. And like, they're like, oh, I don't know, I don't think you can handle it. And I'm like, yo, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna show you guys. And that was like, oh God, because like after that, like I've been an adrenaline junkie, but that was like the big adrenaline junkie because I'm like, we just got this new ride. Yeah. I'm tall enough to do it, and my family can't tell me not to go on the ride because they can't go on the ride. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna do it. And that big one, that big drop was really like really happy. Like I think about that all the time because I'm like, I'm in the pandemic, I miss theme parks for some dumb reason. I'm like, I'm not really a big theme park guy now in adulthood, but I'm like, I miss that rush. Every time I like think about stuff, I'm just like, had to be brave, know it's a ride, just have fun with it.
No, I support that. And also part of the tradition of this podcast is we each, have each guest select a charity that they're passionate about or an organization that they want to support. What's yours? Could you tell us about it?
Yep. My charity that I support is the United States Suicide Prevention Hotline, an organization, just because it's one of those things where I'm like, it's a constant, like, it's a constant, like, thing. Like, everyone's going to eventually die. I'm not being like a morbid person, but a lot of people like, decide to go for suicide. I've had family members and friends, like, commit suicide, stuff like that. I've been like super depressed, but I've never gotten to that point where I'm like, I'm going to attempt it. Yep, I try. But it's one of those organizations where like, we let people just go through their days, but you don't ever know anyone's story. Like, that's why you should always be nice and be kind to whoever, because it could be bad. But I'm like, that's like literally like the last line. Like that organization is like the last line for people who are being watched and everything like that. And they do so much just to keep people, like give people a purpose, like help people, and like, you know, make sure that you get to live another day when there's no problems, but it's just like literally like all in your head, just telling you to do it. So that's an organization that I support. Everyone, you should never be ashamed of like any feelings like that, because life is hard, but you know, just, it's never, you should always have an outlet, and just know that you're never alone.
That was beautiful. And last, where can we follow you?
You can follow me on all social media, Instagram and Twitter at Marcus Cardona. That's MarcusCardona. You can also find me on Facebook at Marcus Cardona Official, just to differentiate all the Marcus Cardonas on there. But yeah, that's where you can find me.
Thank you so much, Marcus. Before I let you go, do you have any last word for our Revisionaries?
Guys, just people are going to tell you stuff that people are going to tell you that you're wrong in a lot of different ways, but always be confident in what you have to produce, because no one else can produce stuff like you can.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Marcus, for being on the show.
Thanks.
The Revisionary Podcast.
I feel like Marcus is the only person I know who can get himself into these types of situations. I don't know. I'm going to work very hard to get a picture of Marcus doing that whole Trump thing. Like, I think that is hilarious. I cannot wait to get my hands on this picture. So make sure you guys are following us on social media. Revisionary Podcast on Instagram, Revisionary Pod on Twitter, and Revisionary Podcast on Facebook. Make sure you're following us, because once I get a hold of that picture, I am 100% going to post that picture, because that is such an absurd concept. It's interesting because this is not going to air, past all the election stuff. So it's just interesting to see where we've come and what he was doing the first time around. And I should have asked him what he was doing this time around during the election. But who knows? Maybe I'll do a follow-up and ask him these types of questions. But again, I'm Juan Carlos, and as always, thank you for listening.
This is